This podcast brought to you by Podcast Center LA.
Action, focus, discipline. This is the Zero Excuses podcast. Each and every week, we talk to high-performing, inspirational athletes, entrepreneurs, and leaders. We ask powerful questions to extract their tools, strategies, and life lessons for you to crush your excuses, to break out of your comfort zone, and accomplish your ambitious dreams and goals. Here's your host, Kenyon HERE.
Hey guys, welcome back to another exciting show. Today we've got another outstanding guest lined up for us. We have Greg McKeown, who is the author of Essentialism, A Disciplined Pursuit of Less, joining us today. You know, this has been a groundbreaking book for me that I've read in the past, and as you'll hear, has been a huge influence on me simply being able to do something like the Zero Excuses podcast. And I won't go into detail because Greg actually turns the table on me here at the beginning and asked me some pretty cool questions, and was a nice change of pace for me to answer some of these questions, and you'll get to know me a little bit better on this podcast as well. But, you know, for someone like Greg's caliber to come on the show, it's really humbling, and I'm really honored to be bringing our conversation to you today. And I wish I had another hour to spend with Greg. Anyways, before we jump into the conversation, as always, just want to remind you guys of the resources we have available to you. First is our closed Facebook group over at facebook.com/groups/Zero Excuses. Excuses spelled without the E, Xcuses. Don't forget to also subscribe and leave us a rating and review on iTunes. I appreciate everyone who has done so up to this point. It's really helped get the word out about the show, and I'm super grateful for you guys taking the time to do that for us. And if you're really looking to take these concepts that we talk about on the show today and each and every week here, I encourage you to check out a couple of other resources that we have. First is our Infinite Results Mastermind group. We've recently had our first inaugural meeting, and we are having some amazing breakthroughs and discussions in there, and you don't want to miss out on that. I have some very limited spots available, for the first 20 people of $29 a month. And if you are really looking for that one-on-one accountability, that one-on-one personalized attention that you need to take your life to the next level, I also encourage you to check out my discipline coaching program, where I work one-on-one with people who are looking to take a chokehold of their time and get the results that they're after in their life. So without any further ado, let's hop into the conversation with Greg. One of the most pressing questions that I get is, Kenyon, what's the one thing that I need to have in order to get back control over my time, build wealth, and forge deep and lasting connections with my family? It's simple. Discipline. Might sound simple, but it's far from easy. That's why I found it absolutely critical to have a mentor, a coach, someone there who can show you the habits, the routines, and the mindset strategies required to build supreme amounts of discipline in your life. If you're interested in having me as your discipline coach, head on over to kenyonhere.com/discipline to sign up for a free 60-minute consulting session. I'll go over some of the ways that I've used discipline to make breakthroughs in every area of my life. We'll also talk about how you could secure me as your discipline coach. But this isn't for everyone. You must be willing to invest the time and the resources necessary to get you the results that you want. I look forward to talking with you soon. Greg, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on the Zero Excuses podcast today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you.
Man, I'm really happy to be talking to you as well. Your book has been a total game changer for me, and I would have to say that there would be no Zero Excuses podcast without having read your book and being able to focus on the things that are important to me. So I just want to say thank you for just writing the book and having such a impact on not only me, but all the probably millions of people that you've been able to reach with your book.
And help me understand that. So is that literally true, that this wouldn't exist without you having read Essentialism?
Yeah. Just to go into a quick backstory, I have a similar story that you share in the book, in that about 3 years ago, my daughter turned 3 about 4 days ago. And that day really changed my life, but I wasn't prepared for the changes that I needed to make in my life and refocus my attention. And I got stuck in the fixed mindset. If you've ever read the book by Carol Dweck, Mindset, I really had that mindset going, and I didn't adjust to find my point of highest contribution. And your book really awoke me to the fact that I was not only not in my point of highest contribution, but I was migrating away from it. So at that point in time, it really started a chain of events that led me to the kind of the personal growth side of things and working on myself. And I stumbled upon your work. And like we talked pre-show, I took a job about 9 months ago and moved my family all the way down from Rochester, New York, down to Charleston, South Carolina, away from friends, away from family, so that I could get back to my roots as, being a Navy guy for 20 years, getting back to being on board ships and also working alongside people who have passion for the same things that I do and being able to mentor them and being able to do that. And then this podcast is also another way for me to help mentor people and reach thousands of people with my message. And, obviously that's been influenced heavily by you.
It sounds like you're really trying to think through what you're doing deliberately rather than just going along with the flow.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I was doing for a long, long time. And my wife would be the first person to tell you that, it wasn't leading me in a very good direction, and it was causing problems with our marriage. And fast forward to today, she's, we've been connecting at a deeper level. We've been together 10 years. It's been amazing, the transformation.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not just affected, that non-essentialism wasn't just affecting, sort of this day-to-day productivity, but it was affecting the most important relationship of your life, and the quality of your own life. It was taking a significant cost in those really important areas of life.
Yeah, and I often found myself checking the proverbial boxes that society tells us we should be checking. Like, we all should be going to college. We all should have, the house with the white picket fence with a big yard. Should have brand new vehicles. We should do this. We should do that. And, I didn't take the time out to really decide for myself exactly what it is that I found important. And another part of the story is that we got rid of about 80% of our belongings during the move down here. We moved out of a 2-bath, 4-bedroom, 2,000 square foot house on 1.5 acres of land and moved into a small 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. And, we've been able to experience so much more together as a family. And it's, like I mentioned, it's a total game changer.
Yeah, and in a sense, I think you've taken it beyond the concepts in the book, because, the concepts can be applied in such a variety of ways. It's just interesting to hear how you've applied it. But again, what I hear you saying is you're much happier with this carefully self-selected life.
Yes.
Than you were the life you were living before.
Absolutely. And the last thing that I want to make this interview about you, Greg, but the last thing I want to mention is that it's also enabled me to take a step back and observe my own thoughts too. I've adopted a meditation practice, and it's also made me conscious of, my thoughts. Are my thoughts either moving me towards or moving me away from my highest point of contribution? And I'm able to actually observe my thoughts and either, number one, decide whether it's going to move me towards that, or number two, if I can simply just do a simple reframe. That was key to me starting this podcast as well. I used to always tell myself that I'm not a great public speaker and that I'll never be able to get in front of a large audience. But I reframed that to say I might not be a good public speaker right now, but the more I do it, the better I'll get. And I can be a good public speaker. So that's another effect of your book on me.
Well, and that connects the dots here between two ideas that it sounds like you've been merging together, but I think is really wise to merge together. And I've spent considerable time thinking about this myself, which is focusing on what's most important. Of course, we understand that as the thrust of the book that I wrote, Essentialism, which is all about figuring out what's essential, eliminating what's not, so that you can execute around the things that matter most to you. So that's on the one side, but on the other, you've got this Carol Dweck research, which is fixed versus growth mindset. Fixed view of intelligence says, well, the amount of intelligence I have is preset, established, and that's just what I have. The growth mindset says the harder I work on something, the smarter I can get at it, the better I can be at it. I can become more intelligent in any particular field. If you plot those two ideas on a 2x2, you find a very compelling set of insights, which are that for a start, you start to learn that there are two kinds of focus. So there's focus through the fixed mindset, which we might call sort of focus as a noun, which is like, you know, you either have focus or you don't have it. And if you have it, it's like one set photograph of what you're supposed to do, what success looks like. And, you know, that's focus as a noun. But if you look at the idea of focus through the growth mindset lens, what you find is that focus is a verb. It's something that you continually are working on. It is, to use the phrase from my book, a disciplined pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about an ongoing journey that you can keep figuring this out, that you can get better at figuring out what's essential. You can get better at eliminating what's not essential. You can get better at executing on those things. And so I just, in fact, I did a whole workshop with Dave Ulrich, who's just one of the great management thinkers of our times. And in that, we were exploring the connection between focus and resilience. And this is what we're talking about now. When you have a growth mindset combined with this, you know, perpetual pursuit of what's essential, when you bring those two ideas together, you have it's like a resilient essentialist. You're going to keep on figuring things out. You're going to keep on simplifying. You're going to be able to do it in a variety of situations. You're going to be incredibly adaptable, which we have to be now because of this onslaught of distractions that people have. And so anyway, I just thought that was fun to riff on those ideas as we get going today.
Yeah, no, that was good. You know, one thing that I definitely love to talk about discipline on the show here, but one thing that I think people get wrong with discipline is it's rigid, or, you know, so it's so structured that you don't have any flexibility. And I love what you just said there, because discipline, when you execute discipline right, you're more nimble than you are when you're undisciplined. So I love what you just said there, because I think that illustrates that point that I like to make oftentimes here. But let's back up a little bit and maybe let's start digging into the history of essentialism. What was that one occurrence that happened that kind of sprung you towards your journey of essentialism and writing the book?
Well, it was the convergence of two experiences that happened simultaneously. First was that I was working with Silicon Valley companies and noticed a predictable pattern, what I've come to call paradox of success, which is that when you have a small group of people focused on the right idea at the right time, it leads to success. The success breeds so many options and opportunities that it can actually undermine the focus that led to success in the first place. And so I observed that all these once successful companies actually started to plateau in their progress or fail altogether. And so, you know, this is a very interesting pattern, a very simple pattern, but one that I saw played out again and again. As I was making these observations, naming this phenomenon, I also had an experience in my personal life where I received an email from my boss at the time that said Friday would be a very bad time for your wife to have a baby because I need you to be at this client meeting. And maybe they were joking, but nevertheless, late Thursday night is when my daughter was born, in the early hours. And Friday morning, instead of being totally focused and serene or centered in that important, joyful moment, I was trying to figure out, how do I keep everybody happy? How can I do both? And to my shame, I went to the client meeting, and afterwards I remember my boss saying, look, the client will respect you for the choice you just made. And maybe they did, although the look on their faces did not evince that sort of confidence. But even if they did, surely I'd made a fool's bargain. So this became the thrust for researching and then writing the book, Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
So just let me just summarize there. It sounds like you were trying to keep everybody happy, but by trying to do that, you sacrificed the happiness of what was most important to you, and that was your family at the time, right?
Yes. What happened is that I was giving up control drip by drip, day by day. I was pursuing something that I wanted, but that wasn't the most important thing. And so I realized, yes, that's how it happens. We get misprioritization. We become reactive. And then day by day, we're giving up more and more of our control. And so this is a cycle that feeds itself. We can call this cycle non-essentialism, or the undisciplined pursuit of more.
Yeah, it sounds like, you are not unlike so many people out there that are just running themselves ragged, trying to get more done, and they are forgetting about not only the people that are most important to themselves, but they're also forgetting about their own happiness and sacrificing their own happiness for trying to make everybody happy. And that definitely is a recipe for not getting what you want out of life. So,
well, but let's just play on that for a second, because non-essentialism is a term to name a way of thinking that has been sold to us. And basically what has been sold to us is that the idea that if you can do everything for everyone, then you'll get everything you want. Just do everything for everyone and you get everything that you want. So that, when you first hear it, well, if I just do everything for everyone and I get everything I want, it actually sounds right. Well, that's probably right. Even though at the same time it sounds a little wrong, because the question we have to ask is that true? You see, because if it is true, we should keep doing it. If people listening to this podcast today find themselves saying, yes, this is working for me, non-essentialism is working for me, then I suggest to them to double down on the strategy. So sleep like less or not at all. Just skip it. React to every single thing from everyone. Do everything that everybody seems to be suggesting you should do on Facebook and on social media. If you all you have to do, if the equation is correct, do everything for everyone and you get everything that you want, then you have a formula for success. And what's strange is that really this is a formula that has been sold to us, not in that exact language, but in almost every magazine, in almost every movie. In so many ways we have been sold. It's certainly an advertisement. We are sold this will work. Now, on the basis that there are people listening to this today who might have tried to apply it non-essentialism but aren't getting the results it promises, right? They're trying to do everything for everyone, but they are not ending up with everything that they want. On the basis that, for example, that somebody might feel stretched too thin at work and at home, to the extent that it's fraying their relationships with the people that matter most. If they're feeling busy but not productive, to the extent that their quality of work is going down, but their stress is going up. For anyone who feels like their life is almost not their own anymore because it's just so constantly hijacked by other people's agenda. For anyone who can say yes to any of those things, the question is there a better approach? Is there a more honest approach? That there isn't this con, and there is, and that is to do the right things for the right people, and then you'll get the right results. And that's a different equation. That's an essentialist equation. And that's a much more honest promise. Non-essentialism is a con, and essentialism is the honest and solid alternative strategy for getting better results in life.
Yeah, I know in the book you illustrate almost kind of the equation to start to uncover our highest point of contribution is the right thing at the right time for the right reasons, right?
Right. So highest point of contribution is an alternative model approach to life than this everything for everyone all of the time, which actually produces just constant frustration. So instead of non-essentialism producing what it was supposed to, does being a people pleaser actually end up pleasing people? Or does it lead to us and them feeling frustrated? Does perfectionism lead to perfection? Or does it lead to frustration and actually slow execution and so on? So essentialism is just an honest look at how to actually get great results.
Hey guys, just want to take a quick second here out of the show to give a shout out to our partners over at Podcast Center LA. They have been with me from the beginning of the Zero Excuses podcast here, and I wouldn't be where I'm at without their help. Steve and the rest of the team there have been really forthcoming with advice and suggestions and improvements for me to make to get the podcast to where it's at today. And they've been gracious enough to extend to you, my listeners, a very, very special offer. If you use the promotional code ZERO, and that's spelled ZERO, you'll get 20% off your first gig. If you've ever been thinking of starting your own podcast, or if you've been going at it alone for a long time and you just need a little bit of help to take your game to the next level, you definitely should check out Podcast Center LA. So let's start digging into that. How can we start determining the right things at the right times and the right reasons? What's behind this formula? What does that look like? How can someone who gets done listening to this podcast sit down and start laying those things out? How did you do that?
Well, I think that it all begins with a pause. So that pause can be, you know how people say count to 10?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I recommend is people count to 1. so like, forget the 10, just count to 1. The next time you think, oh, I should be, just count to 1. That means you take a deep breath, just pause. And in that tiny little habit that I'm describing there, you start to become aware. I mean, you've already talked about it at the beginning here. You started to become aware of your thoughts, started to become aware of what you're doing, started to become aware of the choices you're making. This consciousness allows you to step away from the compulsiveness of our times. So you pause. Pause when you wake up in the morning. Sometimes people, when they think about essentialism, they'll read the book, which I do recommend, and so occasionally they'll say, well, look, I can't just suddenly start saying no to my boss's boss. And I always think, yeah, I wouldn't start there. Let's start with what you control, and really small way you control. So pause, count to 1. Well, okay, you start developing that skill. Now what about pause for the first minute of the day? Decide what you're going to do every first minute of the day, and then expand it. 2 minutes of the day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Eventually, you've designed and are controlling the first half hour of your day. Instead of reactively getting on your phone, checking social media, just getting pulled into all of that noise, you start to design it. You say, okay, the first thing I'm going to do each morning, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to pray, I'm going to breathe, I'm going to look at a list of the 2 or 3 really important goals that I've designed for myself over the next few months. Now, how do you come up with those set of goals? I recommend an extension of this idea of pausing is to schedule and hold a personal quarterly offsite in which you identify, well, what's going on in my life, what's been going on over the last 90 days, where am I now, what's going on right now, what will happen over the next 90 days if I do nothing differently, and then finally, what are the 2 or 3 goals that are really important to me across my whole life, personally and professionally, over the next 90 days. If you do that once every 90 days, and you take that simplified answer, that 2 or 3 things, and you write that on a little card or in a journal or somewhere in a paper format, and you have that by your bedside table, then suddenly you have empowered each first minute of your day, and you get to look at it and say, okay, this is what really matters. It helps you to have more strategic guidance for for the beginning of each day. So this is where I think you begin. There's the things that you control, start small, and pause long enough to start getting clear about the goals that really matter most to you.
Awesome. That's one thing I don't do is schedule a quarterly offsite. I think that's really important that people take some time for themselves. We often overlook this aspect of taking a strategic pause sometimes. And like that ties back to what you mentioned before. We gotta be constantly on the go, but we have to build margin and boundaries in our life. When we say no, we need to set down some of these things that are constantly in our lives and focus on what we need to get accomplished every now and again. So I'm definitely going to be implementing that in my life starting next year. But one thing I do want to almost selfishly ask you about is, I know you have 4 children, and like I mentioned, I have a daughter of my own. How have you been able to start to teach your children these ideas? Almost like, how have you been able to take this essentialism idea and make essentialism for kids, I guess?
Well, first of all, children can understand this. They can't. It's not in any way the world of adults. Just because a lot of the essentialist principles and practices are things that someone might, learn about in the workplace. There might be training in the workplace and so on. I think these are a vital skills and tools for children as early as they can learn anything. As soon as they can be learning language, they can start to be introduced to these practices. If a child can learn how to speak and learn how to walk, I mean, those two things are immense learning developments, right? Absolutely immense. I mean, they can learn the language of essentialism. They can learn the logic. And if they can learn the language, then they can learn the logic. So I think just recognizing, that is possible means we don't have to keep it from them and get it to them later. So I think very early on, you can start to use the actual language that we're talking about here today. You can teach somebody to see non-essentialism. I think that's the first thing that we need to do. We have to shine a light on the nonsense of it. So, I mean, one way that just comes to mind all of a sudden that I've done that with my own children is if we're watching television and an advertisement comes on, we'll talk about this. We'll say, okay, what is being sold? A car is being sold. And then what is really being sold? Well, the idea is that if we have that car, then we'll be a happy family together. Okay, right. Is that true?
Yeah.
And you can start to draw attention to what's being sold, and then by pausing to look at that, you can start to become aware of it, and you're increasing their awareness, their space to reflect on what really is essential. Another thing that comes to mind, in that space, you can start to teach and use the word trade-offs. So key to becoming an essentialist is to be able to trade off something more important for something less important. And you say, I want this thing, therefore I'm willing to give up this thing. And I remember we had an interesting experience with our son. They sort of unintentionally signed my son up for doing baseball. And we'd actually determined that we wouldn't do it. We'd done it before, and it just was so time consuming. And that doesn't mean that other people shouldn't pursue baseball. But we've talked a lot of times with him about you can do anything but not everything. So let's make our choices so that we can not just be a function of what everyone else is doing. And so we signed up for it, and then we just started to feel overwhelmed with all the different pieces that would actually require. And we thought, well, we don't really like to do this. We don't want to disappoint him, and the pleasing is in there, and the genuine concern for him is in there. And so my wife and I, instead of reacting, instead of just carrying on down the path, instead of reacting in the other way, which would also be non-essential, to go, well, no, I'm not doing it either. That's reactive too. No, you pause. And we said, look, why don't we talk to him? So we brought him in and we said, look, let's just talk about this. We signed you up for this. I know that you know about it. I assume you're looking forward to it. How do you feel about doing it or not doing it? What's your view? Instant response from him was, oh, that'd be fine. I don't mind at all if we don't do that. Just like that. At the time, he's 10 years old, might have been 11. Maybe just turned 11. So not old. Oh, yeah, that'd be just fine. I'd be happy to trade that off. I thought that was such a precious example. I mean, I don't know how many hours we added all up, 100 hours more that would have gone into that season. Taking him to the training, being at the games, bringing the family, logistics, all of that for something we assumed that he really wanted, that in fact he didn't even matter to him. He'd have done it. He'd been okay to do it. It's fine. But it was no great thing. It wasn't a clear yes, a definitive yes. By introducing trade-offs, the language of trade-offs, the ideas of trade-offs to people, they can really, even to children, they can start participating in the conversation. And that's just one of many examples I could give of the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it kind of ties back to one thing that stood out to me in your book is that so many people forget about their ability to choose. And it sounds like with your children, you're not only getting them to think on their feet and think logically, but you are reinforcing the fact that they have more choices than they might realize they have, and how much say they have in their own lives and how their life is going to play out. And we tend to lose that as an adult. So that's really what I was curious, or the motivation to ask that question, because I definitely want to instill that in my daughter. I don't want her to forget about her ability to choose. And I love that you illustrated that for us. So in the same vein, why do you think that this probably ties into what we've talked about before, but why do so many people start living by default and give up or forget about their ability to choose?
Well, this is not a neutral culture that we're in. So if we were in a neutral culture that wasn't swaying anybody towards non-essentialism or essentialism, then very few people, I believe, would choose non-essentialism over essentialism. That they would say, well, what I really want is to do too many things in too many directions so that I'm stretched too thin, stressed out, and so on. Like, very few people would choose that consciously. So the question is, why do the vast majority of people choose it by default? Something's going on there. And what I would put to you is that there have been generations of non-essentialism. Phase one was the Industrial Revolution. Phase two is the post-Second World War, and phase three is the last 10 years as we've gone from being connected to hyper-connected. That's like a historical framework for thinking about this moment that we're in. So back to sort of this era one. So pre the Industrial Revolution, the word priority came into the English language. It was the very first or prior thing. And it stayed singular, according to Peter Drucker, for the next 500 years. So it was only in the Industrial Revolution that people started speaking of priorities. So that gives you an indication for what was going on under the surface. Language is always a representation of culture. And so the very fact that somebody thought, well, the answer is we'll have very, very many very first before all other things. It tells you about something true that got lost. It's crazy. You can't have many, many things that go before everything else. I mean, that's a nonsense. So that's an evidence of the effect of the Industrial Revolution. The second phase, the Second World War, what happened there? Now we're part of the industrial complex. We've had this discombobulating war. There was no pause. What kind of pause might have been helpful? What if we paused to mourn? I mean, let's say like for a week or for a month or for a year. And we just say, look, we're just going to pause. We're just going to come to terms. Where are we? What matters now? Let's reflect. Let's think. What if we said, well, every 90 days we'll have we want to incorporate a planning time so people have time off out of their normal work to think. I mean, these are all things that sound really radical compared to what was done, which was nothing.
Right.
We just went on. And so we buried that discombobulating social experience under consumerism. That was a very deliberate strategy, actually. One could call it the panem strategy. Panem is Latin for the circus and bread. And so this was, instead of deal with the issues, let's just rush on to stuff, to toys, to time-saving devices, and all of that stuff that came in the 50s. So this is where the next level was sold to us. You can have it all if you do it all. You can have every you ought to want this extreme consumerism. And then this final phase that I mentioned is this social media culture where you've taken the assumptions of the previous two eras, but now you've hyped them up so that instead of just trying to keep up with the Joneses in the 50s, you've got hundreds or thousands of people that you're connected with that you're trying to keep up with. So maybe this all sounds like bad news, but I think stepping aside, pausing to reflect on this helps us to see why, to answer your question now directly, why we might choose to live by default instead of by design. That's the sway of culture that gets in the way. So what we have to do is realize, wow, all this adds up. What these phases I'm describing, what they add up to is a busyness bubble where, and just like every other bubble before it, the real estate bubble and the .com bubble and so on, it will burst. It has to burst because it's based on false assumptions. So whenever you have false assumptions, however socially valued they become, they're based on something untrue. They eventually, therefore, unsustainable. Therefore, it will burst. That's the scene in which we find ourselves now. The path of least resistance is to be a non-essentialist, because that's what everyone's doing. Just like the path of least resistance in the middle of the real estate bubble was to buy more house than you could afford, a second house, a third house, no money down, and so on.
Right.
So that's the path now. But just like the real estate bubble, if you chose to be an essentialist before you had to be, then you could still take all the advantage of being an essentialist investor, even though everyone else is doing other crazy stuff. You might not feel in sync with everybody, but you'd still be making the wise investments. So I remember getting caught up a little bit in the real estate fever, and we were living in a lovely home in Arizona at the time, and everybody, honestly, everyone was like quitting their jobs and becoming realtors of one kind or another somewhere in the real estate business. It really felt like everybody was giving up their careers, well-designed careers and life and degrees and so on, because it was a no-brainer. This is how you're going to make money. In the midst of this, there was this really beautiful home, and I thought, I want to buy that home. And I just carried on persuading my wife. And the whole time she said, I just don't see that we ought to do that. I don't think we need that. That doesn't seem, she didn't use that word, but this doesn't seem essential to me. So she was an essentialist before she had to be. And I got almost all the way to sign on the house I'm describing. And I just could not feel good about it. I could not feel the clarity. This is the right path. This is the right thing at the right time. And so I didn't. I held back, as Joseph Conrad says in The Heart of Darkness, I held back one wavering foot. I just wasn't ready to take the leap. Well, she was the essentialist. I was the sort of apologetic, sort of essentialist, or maybe not committed non-essentialist. And we didn't buy the house. We didn't do it. Thank goodness we didn't do it. I mean, this was certainly within months of the real estate bubble bursting. And I know of good people who lost their shirts on that because they overextended themselves and so on. So, by metaphor, now getting clearer back to essentialism, you can choose to become an essentialist before you have to. And that's the most fortunate, financially sound, time sound, resource sound strategy. You don't wait until it bursts. I mean, everyone was an essentialist real estate investor the day after the bubble burst, right?
Yeah.
After the bubble burst, no one's investing crazy anymore. No one's, lending crazy anymore the day after. But that doesn't save you from the worst damage. You've got to act before you have to. And that's true at the personal, individual level, as well as it's true at every other level.
It sounds like you're kind of describing the shiny object syndrome almost here. That's the term that keeps popping in my mind as you're going through all this. Is like how many times, we can apply this to, like you mentioned, the new car in your example with your kids, and then the real estate bubble. And what else in our life are we like chasing after these shiny objects just because it's the next best thing? And you're describing that to a T, and that's definitely something that I fell victim to.
And I want to make sure that we broaden our conversation about essentialism to be beyond the stuff of our lives, even though I think it's completely consistent there. We're talking about a design principle, and the design principle is 3 words: less but better.
Mm-hmm.
Less but better is the term that is the English translation of a German phrase that was written by Dieter Rams, the head designer for Braun for 35 years. And he came up with all these principles for like what makes great design. His aesthetic was really unique. I mean, there's one example, when he created a record player, it looked so, you can look it up online. People can go and look it up online, Dieter Rams record player, and just see what it looks like. But then actually, that won't do it fully justice. You should see it. It's very, clean and purposeful, and there aren't 50 buttons on there and so on. But to really understand how radical what he did with that design was, you have to go back and look at what record players looked like at the time before he did this. Because before, they were pieces of furniture. The record player was like built into something that, like something that looked a bit like a huge dresser,
right?
With wood all around it, and that's just the container. And then inside, of course, there's all different pieces. And he just said, let's strip it down to the essentials. Less but better. Less but better was his key design. Now, we know that you can apply that principle to product design, as he did to many fabulous different products over many years. We also know because Dieter Rams and the less but better ethic is directly affected Johnny Ive at Apple. So he's been not like it's not well they happen both to care about simplicity. No, he was directly affected by Dieter Rams. So his products, some of them have specific nods to Dieter Rams' design, like the old calculator on the iPhone was Dieter Rams' calculator. So they've done this as an evidence of a compliment to sort of a master designer. So, but you see, now that's still on products. The question we have to say is this, is can you take the same design ethic, less but better, and design with it all the human elements of your life? Could you design your morning routine to be less but better? Could you design your goals to be less but better? Could you design the relationships you have in your life less but better? Could you design the people strategy that when you're hiring people, the development strategy if you're developing people in your organization less but better? Could you take it and create an entire organization grown out of that ethic? In fact, it's not how would I say a thought experiment only, because there's a company called Bitsu based in the United Kingdom that has done just what I'm describing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a company that has the right to develop all of Dieter Rams' products. So they have many, many, many products to choose between. They currently sell, I think, 3 of them. They've been around for, I'm not sure I'm getting the times exactly right, but I think they've been around now about 50 years as a company. For 35, 40 years of that, I think they sold only one of his products. It was his library shelving system. Then they eventually decided that they would also do the chair. What I'm saying is that they have, when I talked to the managing director there, Mark Adams, this was early on before I'd written Essentialism. I was interviewing him. I was trying, if you like, to amplify quiet voices, the quiet essentialist voices in this loud non-essentialist world. And so I was talking to him, and when I was giving him this language, I said, yes, I'm writing about how to become an essentialist. And he just stopped. And he's an understated, stylistic communicator. But he said, no, Greg, he said, I can say that that's what I've been for 35 years. I've been an essentialist. And it was so cool to provide language to someone who has been so oriented around less but better for so long, and for him to adopt that instantly. Yes, that is what I am. That's who I am. That's how I've built this company. And so when they're selecting talent, for example, they are incredibly selective. They don't just want another person. They want the right person. So they have to be really thoughtful, and they have a whole process that they've developed for how to make sure that they've got just the right person coming into the company, what they call a natural fit. They have to be natural. It can't just be forced. They can't just do it because they want a job. Carefully, thoughtfully selected over time. And so what you get if you design this way is calmer, clearer, more orderly organizations. You get them with less noise and stress in them, and you build them in a way that they can last for 100 years.
One thing that's sticking out here is I've definitely noticed within myself being calmer, clearer, and far less stressed after adopting a lot of the ideas that you talk about in your book. And it's really interesting to hear how you were able to extract that from someone like you were talking about there. That's so fascinating that you were able to put a term on this man's way of thinking. And I absolutely love what you just said there. But we're starting to run short on time here, Greg. But I do want to ask you about, the book has been out for almost 4 years now, and one would think that it's logical for you to start working on a new book. And listen to some of the interviews that you've given in the past, preparing for this myself. I know you're evolving your highest point of contribution, if you will, to do something more. What's coming down the line for you?
Well, the positive pressure to immediately start work on your next book when you've finished the old book is immense. I want to do it. You're fueled up to do it. Essentialism's been much more successful than any of us thought it would be. All of these things mean that the opportunity exceeds, your available time and energy. And what I'm always interested in is how do you go to the next level of contribution?
Yes.
So not how to plateau, so not just how to continue your current contribution, but how to get to the next level. And so as I've wrestled with this more and more, I found that it needs to be a platform change where instead of saying, okay, well, you've got this audience and these people and you just write the next book sort of thoughtlessly, it's been this shift towards, well, is there a way to build a television show around these principles of essentialism and how to apply them? And it's all early days still, but a year and a half ago, not quite a year and a half now, but I was just finally, still reluctantly putting together ideas for the next book, and then just felt, no, it's wrong. The timing's wrong. It might be the right thing, but the timing's wrong. And so I put it on pause, and it was right after that Steve Harvey read Essentialism and blogged about it, said, this book's changed my life. And because of the trade-off that had been made between the book and television, I was paying attention. I was focused on it. And so that led to multiple appearances on his show, and we started doing Essentialism, what's the word I'm looking for, like not just makeover, but where you go and sort of interrupt someone's life a bit. And you say, okay, you're being pulled all over the place. What can we do about it? And we just filmed all of this, and it just was received so well. And while we're doing this, I mean, there's millions of people literally who are learning about essentialism at a single time. And suddenly you see why the platform can be so powerful, because instead of teaching 50 people or 100 people, or even at a large keynote, as I speak at conferences, maybe you're speaking to 5,000 people, suddenly it's like millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you think the potential is so immense. If I have to choose between them, I would choose to try and create a show over the next book. What I do believe is that if you get the order right, it's a bit like hitting the kingpin in 10-pin bowling. If you hit the kingpin, you hit the right one, and you end up with many of the other rewards. And so I think that if I keep focused on the television path, then eventually there will be other books. And I'm starting to feel like the timing might be getting closer now for doing that. But still, even now, on almost a daily basis, I have to deliberately choose to focus on the television show first, because it's yes, the value of it's much higher, but it's also much newer to me. It's much scarier to me. It's an unknown path, whereas writing the next book is a very known path, is a path of least resistance almost. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think that keep focusing on the show, keep focusing on trying to crack the code on how to build it in just the right way that it would get picked up and sold, and good things are happening with it. But I'm in it for the long haul. This is so TV or bust, I suppose, is how I might describe it.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the common themes here is if it feels uncomfortable, that's probably where you should start heading, because there's so many of us that get stuck in that comfortable place day after day. We get comfortable with the 9-to-5 job with the benefits and everything, and that feels comfortable, but we don't take that next step that might seem uncomfortable, but we know it's going to breed the success that we want to have in our lives. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you on TV here very shortly. I'm sure it's going to happen for you here any day now or any week, because I know it'll be a hit, and people need to hear what you have to say. And I'm glad you took some time out of your day to spend it with me and my audience here. And, this has been a very fascinating discussion. And before I let you go, what's the best way for us to get in touch with you? I know your book is pretty much everywhere where books are sold. And correct me if I'm wrong, did you not write another book previous to Essentialism as well? Multipliers? Yes,
that's right. I worked hard on every aspect of that book, and I enjoyed it. And I think that they can be complementary together, in fact, consistent with what we started right at the beginning, which is that there's a way of living and leading that if you can focus, but do it with a growth mindset, that you can develop yourself and the people around you. Putting it this way, you don't have to be a jerk to be an essentialist.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, my own view is that if you're being a jerk, you're almost certainly not being an essentialist, because it's all about developing focus with the right people and treating them in the right way at the right time. So anyway, yeah, but you're quite right.
Yeah, and I actually just bought that book, and I actually didn't realize that you had another book other than Essentialism out there. So I'm looking forward to reading that book, because it really resonates with a lot of what I've been taught in the military about, leading people so that they can take over for you one day, and spreading your knowledge and experience, and basically trying to clone yourself as much as possible. So I'm really looking forward to reading that book as well. But Greg, is there anything, as we wrap up here, is there anything else that you might want to mention before we sign off here?
No, but thank you so much for the chance to share this conversation.
All righty, Greg. Thanks a lot, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Zero Excuses podcast. Join the conversation at kenyonzitska.com in our Facebook group. And don't forget to rate and subscribe to our show. We'll talk to you next week. And always remember, results, not excuses.